The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed overhead as Elena Mercer struggled to focus through the fog of her medication. Her body felt hollow. The pain from surgery dulled to a distant throb beneath layers of anesthesia. The pristine white sheets felt rough against her fingers, a stark contrast to the plush bedding she'd once shared with Marcus. "Mrs. Mercer?" The nurse's voice was gentle, practiced in delivering news to the vulnerable. "You have a visitor." Elena's heart lifted momentarily, the machinery beside her bed registering a slight increase in her pulse. Perhaps Marcus had finally come. 3 days since her emergency surgery, and not even a text. But instead of her husband's familiar silhouette, a man in a crisp charcoal suit appeared in the doorway. Gabriel Ortiz, her attorney. The serious set of his mouth told her everything. "Gabriel." Her voice came out raspy, unfamiliar. "Elena." He approached cautiously, manila envelope in hand. "I tried to call you first, but my phone's been off. The doctors said I needed rest." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why are you here?" Gabriel's gaze flicked to the nurse, who discreetly stepped out. "Marcus filed for divorce yesterday." His words fell like stones into still water. "I'm sorry to deliver this now, but he's expediting everything. Claiming abandonment, if you can believe it." Elena's laugh was hollow. "Abandonment? I'm in the hospital having a tumor removed." "I know." "It's absurd." Gabriel hesitated. "There's more. He's moved someone into your house. A woman named Vanessa Porter." The monitor beside Elena's bed began to beep more rapidly as her heart rate spiked. "He's—" The words died in her throat. The tumor they'd removed had been benign, but suddenly she felt poisoned from within. "He's already changed the locks." "I'm so sorry, Elena." As Gabriel placed the envelope on her bedside table, Elena's gaze drifted to the window, where storm clouds gathered over the city skyline. Marcus had no idea what was coming. He thought he was leaving a struggling graphic designer with mounting medical bills. He didn't know about her secret account, about the software company she'd quietly built and sold, about the $130,000 annual passive income that she'd been saving for their future, for the family they'd planned to start next year. "Gabriel," she said, her voice suddenly clear and cold as the rain that began to patter against the window. "How quickly can we counterfile? 6 months earlier." "You're putting too much pressure on yourself," Marcus said, his fingers rapidly typing as he glanced between 2 computer screens. The blue light cast sharp shadows across his handsome face, making his features appear harder than they were. "Maybe it's time to admit the freelance thing isn't working out." Elena watched him from the kitchen island, where she was pretending to sketch new logo concepts. She'd actually finalized the sale of her encryption software company 3 hours earlier, a deal worth $4.7 million after taxes. "I have some promising clients lined up," she said carefully. It wasn't exactly a lie. Her investors were promising indeed, and the quarterly payments had just started flowing into her separate account. Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with a disappointment he no longer bothered to hide. "We can't keep living on my income alone, Elle. The medical insurance barely covers your checkups, and now they want more tests?" He gestured vaguely toward her abdomen. "We can't afford this." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her side, where the occasional pain had been growing more persistent. The pain she'd been downplaying for months. "I know. I'll figure something out." What she couldn't say was that she already had. After watching her mother die slowly, painfully, and expensively from the same type of tumor that now grew inside her, Elena had sworn 2 things. She would have the best medical care if her time came, and she would create financial security that couldn't be wiped out by illness. Her mother's husband had abandoned her when the medical bills mounted. Elena wouldn't let history repeat itself, but Marcus didn't know any of this. To him, Elena was the art school girlfriend who'd never quite found her professional footing, whose graphic design business barely broke even. The woman who needed his stable accounting job and benefits. The wife who'd become a financial burden. She'd planned to tell him everything after her next doctor's appointment, to finally explain why she'd kept her success secret. She wanted to surprise him with financial freedom. No more overtime, no more stress about bills. They could finally start the family they'd been postponing. She'd even started looking at houses in the suburbs, planning to present it all as a complete package. "I'm heading out," Marcus said, closing his laptop. "Dinner with the team. Don't wait up." Elena watched him kiss her cheek perfunctorily, his mind already elsewhere. As the door closed behind him, she opened her private email, where another message from her lead developer awaited. Another successful implementation, another satisfied client. She could buy their apartment building outright now if she wanted. Instead, she paid the rent from her modest graphic design income, keeping up appearances while her actual fortune grew. "You've been lying to him for 3 years?" Tara Chen leaned forward, her espresso forgotten. The busy cafe around them provided perfect cover for their conversation, countless other secrets being shared at neighboring tables. "Not lying," Elena protested weakly. "Just withholding." Tara's skeptical expression spoke volumes. "And you don't think he'll be upset that his wife secretly built a multi-million-dollar company while he's been stressed about making rent?" Elena stirred her untouched tea. "I wanted to be certain it would succeed first. Marcus is so traditional. He still believes he needs to be the provider. And after watching what happened with my mom?" She trailed off, the memory still raw. "Your mom's husband was a selfish jerk who couldn't handle difficulty," Tara said bluntly. "Marcus isn't like that." Elena wasn't so sure anymore. The way he'd been distancing himself since her health concerns began, the late nights at the office, the occasional whiff of unfamiliar perfume, signs she'd been ignoring. "I'm telling him after my tests come back," Elena said firmly. "I'll show him everything. The money, the new house I'm looking at, our future. He just needs to see I did this for us." Tara reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I think you're being incredibly generous. Most people who build something like you did want the recognition." "I don't need recognition," Elena said quietly. "I just need security." As she spoke the words, her phone lit up with a text. The doctor wanted to move her appointment up. They'd found something concerning in her preliminary results. The next 3 months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, increasing pain, and Marcus's growing detachment. Elena watched him pull away, making excuses to sleep in the guest room. "I don't want to bump your side." Spending weekends at the office, taking calls that he stepped outside to answer. She told herself it was stress, his promotion at work, her declining health, the financial pressure he thought they were under. She almost told him about the money countless times, but something always stopped her. The way he'd look through her rather than at her. The text notifications he'd quickly dismiss when she entered the room. The growing suspicion that her illness wasn't the only thing creating distance between them. By the time her surgery was scheduled, Elena was sleeping alone most nights. Marcus had cited an important client conference the week of her procedure, promising to be back the day after surgery. "I'll have Tara drive you," he'd said, kissing her forehead in that absent way that had become his signature. "She can stay with you until I'm back. It's just a simple procedure, right? Nothing to worry about, except it wasn't simple." What should have been a straightforward removal had revealed complications. One night in the hospital had turned into 3, then 5, and Marcus hadn't answered a single call. Now, staring at divorce papers while still connected to IV fluids, Elena finally understood. It hadn't been about money or stress or her illness. Marcus had simply found someone else, and her medical crisis had provided the perfect exit strategy. As the rain streaked down the hospital window, Elena made a decision. She'd protected her assets for precisely this scenario. Now it was time to use them. 2 months later, Marcus Mercer straightened his tie in the hallway mirror, whistling softly. The morning light streamed through the windows of what had once been his and Elena's apartment, now transformed by Vanessa's designer touch. Gone were Elena's eclectic art pieces and cozy throws, replaced by sleek minimalist decor and chrome accents that Vanessa insisted better showcased the apartment's potential. "You look handsome," Vanessa purred, sliding her arms around him from behind. Her diamond engagement ring caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the wall. "Big day?" "Finalizing everything with Elena," he replied, turning to kiss her. "Then we're officially in the clear. Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She's not contesting anything? Radio silence. Gabriel says she signed everything without a word. Marcus shrugged, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features before disappearing. Probably realized fighting would just drag things out. What he didn't mention was his relief. The guilt that had gnawed at him during Elena's illness had faded once he'd made his decision. Vanessa was vibrant, ambitious, connected, everything Elena had never been. She understood his drive, his need to climb higher. She wouldn't hold him back with medical bills and a struggling career. "I'll be back by 6. Dinner reservation at 8? He asked, already reaching for his briefcase. Vanessa nodded, her smile returning. "Perfect. Wear that navy suit I bought you." The summer air was thick with humidity as Marcus emerged from the subway near his attorney's office. He checked his phone, an hour before the meeting. Enough time to grab coffee and review the final settlement papers. The cafe across from the law offices was crowded with the morning rush. As he waited in line, a familiar laugh caught his attention. A laugh he hadn't heard in months. Elena sat in the corner booth, radiant in a tailored cream suit that Marcus had never seen before. Her hair, which had been dull and limp during her illness, now fell in glossy waves around her shoulders. But most striking was her expression, animated, confident, as she spoke with an older man in an expensive suit. Marcus hesitated, then decided he couldn't avoid her. Better to get the awkward encounter over with now rather than in the attorney's office. "Elena," he said, approaching her table. "You look recovered." Her smile didn't falter as she turned to him, but something flickered behind her eyes. Marcus. What a surprise. The man across from her raised his eyebrows but said nothing. "I didn't expect to see you here," Marcus continued, suddenly aware of how uncomfortable he felt. "I thought you'd send your attorney to the meeting." "Change of plans," Elena said smoothly. "Marcus, this is Richard Whitman, my investment advisor." "Richard, this is Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband." "Investment advisor?" The words didn't compute. Elena had never had investments beyond their modest 401k. Richard extended his hand, his grip firm. "Pleasure. Elena's been one of our most impressive clients. Not everyone turns seed capital into the kind of portfolio she's built." Marcus blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Elena's smile remained pleasant, but her eyes had turned to ice. "Richard's been helping me manage my assets since the software company sold. We were just discussing the new property acquisition." "Software company? Property acquisition?" Marcus felt like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. "What are you talking about? Quantum Shield?" Richard looked between them, confusion evident. "Your wife's encryption software? The sale was featured in Tech Weekly last year." Marcus's mind raced, trying to make sense of the information. There must be some mistake. Elena's a graphic designer. A small, satisfied smile played at Elena's lips. "I do have a design degree, yes. And I did take some small design contracts. But my main work for the past 4 years has been Quantum Shield. The company I founded, built, and sold for just under $5 million. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. "That's impossible. You never asked," Elena cut in, her voice pleasant but firm. "You assumed my design work wasn't successful because I chose not to correct you. You were so content believing you were the provider, the successful one." She tilted her head slightly. "It seemed important to you." Richard, sensing the tension, gathered his papers. "I should give you 2 a moment." "Elena, we'll continue this at 2? She nodded, never taking her eyes off Marcus's increasingly pale face. "Perfect. We'll finalize the waterfront purchase then." As Richard departed, Marcus sank uninvited into the vacant chair. "I don't understand. If you had this money, why were you worried about the medical bills? Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't worried about the bills. I was worried about the diagnosis," Elena corrected him. "As for why I didn't tell you," she paused, studying him. "I was saving it. For our future. For the family we talked about starting." Her voice remained steady, but something raw flickered across her expression. "I was going to surprise you after my surgery. Show you that we could afford the house in Brookfield, that you could leave the job that was making you so unhappy. Marcus stared at her, memories rearranging themselves in his mind. All those nights she'd stayed up late, trying to find clients. She'd been building a company. The trips to design conferences had likely been investor meetings. The constant reassurances that they'd be fine financially someday. Why keep it secret for so long? He finally managed. Elena's expression softened fractionally. At first, I wasn't sure it would succeed. Then, I saw how important it was to you to be the provider. And then, she hesitated. My mother's husband left her when her medical bills became too much. I wanted to be certain I could take care of myself if history repeated itself. Her gaze was direct. Which it did. The implications of her words hit him like a physical blow. That's not why Please, she interrupted, raising a hand. Let's not do this. The divorce is almost final. You've moved on. For the first time, a crack appeared in her composed facade. You moved on while I was still in the hospital. Marcus fell silent, shame washing over him. Not just for leaving her during her illness, but for the realization that he'd never really known her at all. He'd underestimated her so completely, dismissed her potential so casually, that she'd built an entire successful life parallel to their marriage, one he'd never even glimpsed. Elena? She glanced at her watch, cutting him off. I need to go. I'll see you at the attorney's office in an hour. She gathered her belongings with practiced efficiency. Oh, and Marcus? You might want to review the settlement agreement again. I had Gabriel make some adjustments. As she walked away, her cream suit gleaming in the morning light, Marcus sat frozen, suddenly aware that he may have made the most catastrophic miscalculation of his life. The conference room of Saunders. Ortiz and Klein felt airless despite its expansive windows and high ceilings. Marcus sat rigidly across from Elena, their respective attorneys flanking them like seconds in a duel. The mahogany table between them might as well have been an ocean. Gabriel Ortiz slid a revised settlement agreement across to Marcus's attorney, Howard Klein, a thin smile playing at his lips. As you'll see, Gabriel explained, his voice professionally neutral, we've made several amendments to reflect Mrs. Mercer's actual financial situation, which was not accurately represented in the initial filing. Howard frowned, scanning the document. His eyebrows climbed steadily toward his hairline as he read. This is substantially different from our previous terms. Yes, Gabriel agreed pleasantly. The previous terms were based on incomplete information. Marcus leaned toward his attorney. What does it say? Howard lowered his voice. They've changed everything. It says here that Elena waives any claim to your assets or future earnings, but... He flipped a page, his frown deepening. She's seeking reimbursement for all household expenses she covered during your marriage, with interest. And she's claiming the apartment was purchased primarily with her funds, despite being in both your names. That's ridiculous, Marcus hissed. We rented that apartment. We never owned it, Elena's voice cut through their whispered conference. Actually, I bought the building through my holding company last year. The rental payments you've been making have been going into my business account. I was planning to tell you once everything was set up for our future. Her smile was knife-sharp. Plans change, Marcus stared at her, disbelief warring with growing horror. You owned our apartment building? All this time? Not just the building, Gabriel interjected smoothly. As detailed in Appendix C, Mrs. Mercer also owns the majority stake in Mercer and Associates. The blood drained from Marcus's face. My accounting firm? Elena nodded, something almost like regret flickering across her features. A silent investment through my venture fund. I thought it would help you expand the business eventually. She paused. I invested in things that mattered to you, Marcus. Things I thought would be part of our shared future. The conference room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. Marcus's entire professional and personal life had been quietly, invisibly supported by the woman he'd dismissed as financially dependent. The woman he'd abandoned in a hospital bed? This can't be legal, he finally managed, looking desperately at Howard. She concealed assets during our marriage. That's fraud, Gabriel's expression hardened. No court will see it that way, Mr. Mercer. My client kept her finances separate but never lied about them. She has documentation of her intention to share everything after her health crisis passed. Documentation that includes the down payment on a house in Brookfield, purchased in both your names. He slid a property deed across the table. A surprise she never got to give you. Marcus stared at the deed, at the house that would have been their future home. The perfect colonial with the wraparound porch they'd once driven past, Elena commenting how perfect it would be for children to play on. The house he'd dismissed as a pipe dream. Meanwhile, Gabriel continued, his voice hardening, we have evidence that you began your relationship with Ms. Porter approximately 8 months ago, well before my client's hospitalization. Elena's composed expression faltered slightly at this confirmation of what she'd suspected, but she quickly regained control. We're not seeking punitive damages, she said quietly. Despite having grounds for them, I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine. With fair compensation for joint expenses I covered under the assumption of a shared future. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. Not as the struggling artist he'd patronized, but as the formidable businesswoman she'd always been. Someone who had calculated risks, made investments, built security, all while he'd been looking through her rather than at her. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why keep it all secret? We could have had everything so much earlier. The house, the family, everything. Elena's carefully constructed composure cracked then, genuine emotion bleeding through. Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. Her voice trembled slightly. I watched my mother's husband walk away when her medical bills mounted, claiming he couldn't handle the financial burden. In reality, he just couldn't handle her illness, her vulnerability. The money was his excuse. She met Marcus's gaze directly. I needed to know if you'd stay when things got hard. If you'd love me through sickness as you promised. No financial incentives, no golden handcuffs. Just love. The silence that followed was deafening. In it, Marcus heard the echo of his own failure. The terms are more than fair, Gabriel said after a moment, professional mask back in place. Mrs. Mercer could legally claim much more. Howard leaned toward Marcus. He's right. If half of what they're showing is accurate, we're getting off easy. I recommend you sign. Marcus barely heard him, still staring at Elena. At the stranger he'd married, betrayed, and lost without ever truly knowing. And if I contest it? Elena sighed, suddenly looking tired. Then we go to court, Marcus. Your affair becomes public record. Your company's financial structure gets examined. Your new fiancé learns exactly how much of your life was built on my investments. She shook her head. Neither of us wants that. Marcus felt the walls closing in, options evaporating. He'd walked into this meeting expecting to finalize a clean break from a financially dependent ex-wife. Instead, he was facing the devastating reality that he'd thrown away a partnership with a woman whose success dwarfed his own. A woman who had been planning their dream future while he'd been sneaking around with Vanessa. One last thing, Elena said, reaching into her portfolio. She withdrew a small velvet box and placed it gently on the table between them. The ring was my grandmother's. I'd like you to have it back. The vintage emerald-cut diamond, the ring he'd promised, would symbolize a love that would last through anything. With shaking fingers, Marcus lifted his pen and signed the agreement. 1 year later, the ocean breeze tugged at Elena's hair as she stood on the deck of her beach house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and rose. A glass of wine sat untouched on the railing beside her, condensation beating on its surface. Behind her, the sliding glass door whispered open. Tara stepped out, wrapping a light cardigan around her shoulders against the evening chill. You've been out here for an hour, she said, concern evident in her voice. Everything okay? Elena smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes, something that had become increasingly common over the past few months. Just thinking, today would have been our anniversary. Tara leaned against the railing beside her. Regrets? Elena considered the question, watching a sailboat glide along the horizon. Not about ending it. That was the right decision even before I found out about Vanessa. She took a sip of her wine. But I regret the secrets. The years I spent hiding who I really was because I was afraid of changing our dynamic. You were protecting yourself, Tara reminded her. After what happened with your mom, I know, Elena interrupted gently, but relationships shouldn't be tests. I was so focused on making sure Marcus wouldn't leave me if things got hard that I never gave him the chance to be a true partner. She shook her head. I'm not excusing what he did, but I didn't trust him with the truth either. The past year had brought clarity along with healing. The divorce had finalized quickly after that confrontation in the attorney's office. Marcus had signed everything without further contest, disappeared from her life with a thoroughness that suggested shame as much as desire for a clean break she'd heard through. Mutual connections that his engagement to Vanessa had ended messily 3 months later. Apparently, the revelation that Marcus's successful image had been partially sustained by his ex-wife's secret fortune had changed Vanessa's perception of him. Or perhaps it was the significantly reduced circumstances he now found himself in, having lost both his apartment and his controlling interest in his firm. Elena hadn't wished for his downfall, but she couldn't deny the poetic justice of it. Gabriel called earlier, Tara said, interrupting Elena's thoughts. The foundation paperwork is finalized. A smile spread across Elena's face. So it's official? Tara nodded. The Elena Mercer Foundation for Medical Security is officially accepting applications. 20 families facing catastrophic medical expenses will receive grants this year. Warmth spread through Elena's chest, more satisfying than any business success had ever been. After her recovery, she'd found herself wondering how many other people were out there facing the impossible choice between health and financial ruin. How many marriages crumbled under the pressure? How many people felt they had to hide their vulnerabilities or risk abandonment? The foundation couldn't solve the systemic problems, but it could create breathing room for families in crisis. Time to focus on healing without losing everything else. He sent a letter, Tara said quietly after a moment. Marcus, to the foundation. Gabriel forwarded it to me since you said you didn't want direct contact. Elena's breath caught. What did it say? Tara hesitated. That he's sorry. That he's in therapy working through why he ran when things got hard. That seeing what you're doing with the foundation made him realize how much fear drove his decisions. She paused. He's not asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just wanted you to know that your story changed him. Elena turned back to the ocean, emotions complicated and contradictory. The anger had faded months ago, leaving something more nuanced in its place. Understanding, perhaps, not of his betrayal, but of the human capacity for fear-driven decisions. She'd made her own, after all. Good for him, she said finally, and meant it. Everyone deserves the chance to grow. Speaking of growth, Tara said, her tone lightening, Dr. Handsome called while you were communing with the waves. Confirmed dinner for Saturday. A smile tugged at Elena's lips as she thought of Dr. James Bennett, the oncologist she'd met during one of the foundation's planning sessions. Brilliant, compassionate, and refreshingly direct about his interest in her. No games, no power dynamics, just honest conversation between equals. I told him I'd check your extremely busy social calendar. Tara teased, Elena laughed, the sound carried away by the salt-scented breeze. Tell him I'm looking forward to it. As darkness settled over the water, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. The illness that had nearly taken her life, but had ultimately saved her from a marriage built on incomplete truths. The painful awakening in that hospital room that had forced her to confront not just Marcus's betrayal, but her own role in creating a relationship where neither of them had truly been seen. The fortune she'd hidden had been far more than financial. It had been her competence, her strength, her true self. All the parts she'd kept in shadow for fear of upsetting a balance that had been unhealthy from the start. Inside the beach house, lights glowed warmly against the gathering twilight. A home that was entirely hers, filled with art she loved, books she actually read, spaces where she could be fully herself. No hiding, no dimming her light, no carefully maintained facade. The real fortune, she realized, had never been the money. It had been the freedom waiting on the other side of truth. Elena raised her glass to the darkening horizon, a toast to lessons learned and futures reclaimed. "To what comes next," she whispered, and turned toward the light.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.